Later, I would say this is probably the 70s and early 80s, where he's doing reflections. He's actually doing mirrors, where he's asking you to reflect. And then scenes of suburbia, specifically the houses. And then in the 90s, he does a lot of murals in New York City, a lot of subway murals. And he does a lot of donating of his time and money and paintings. He dies pretty suddenly of a pneumonia, and his wife, Dorothy, sets up something called the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, which I was sad to read is now defunct, and the art is probably because Dorothy's getting older, and the artwork is going to be split between the Whitney Museum and the Smithsonian's. That is information that I read about 6 months ago. So the Lichtenstein Foundation website is still there, and it catalogs all of his work and has his biography, but that's sort of, art news, a little behind the scenes chatter that I've been hearing. And then what I think is interesting, because a couple slides back I talked about how the woman was eye candy and she wasn't fully formed. This is some of his later stuff where you can see the woman is not only fully formed, she's actually three-dimensional. He goes into sculpture, and he's fascinated with clay and using molds. And so the women become more formed, and the men become less formed. And I've seen paintings of that he had. Okay, so this looks like cheese, but it had like a razor blade, because he likes that reflective surface, but it was a razor blade for a head. So it's really becoming unequal now, or you might say it's really the worm turned, because now towards the end of his style, the end of his work, really the woman is becoming a completely fully formed human. And here he is in the 90s. I believe this is at the Guggenheim. They had a retrospective that I was lucky enough to see even as a young girl, and I do remember it. His friend and author, Diane Waldman, wrote a huge book. If you ever get your hands on it, it really is soup to nuts on Roy Lichtenstein. And let me just catch up here. Okay, I wanted to show you, I'm almost done, I have 2 slides left, but I wanted to show you some of his technique. So on the left is the comic book page that Roy looked through. And he wasn't really even a big fan of comics, but he felt like if he pulled out or cropped just the right image, then it would say and speak to exactly his message. And so that's on the left, that's the comic book page, and as you can see on the right is his painting. And I thought this was interesting. This is called the Hero Initiative, and I don't know if you could read it, but basically it's an artist that feels he doesn't have a lot of money, and he feels super jilted because Roy Lichtenstein became a multi-millionaire based on his art. And so he goes shopping, that's the shopping cart, and then he sits down with people from the Hero Initiative, and they give him a gift card, that's the card that he's opening up, and he's basically saying, I would have loved to have a glass of wine with Roy, but I can't do that, but at least I can have a glass of wine, in celebration. I finally got what I want. Glass of wine on behalf of Roy, something like that. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's my last slide. But the comic book industry really revived itself, and especially recently. But Roy Lichtenstein was alive in an era where he was able to kind of get away with the appropriating of images that I don't think any artist could ever do nowadays. But sadly, and it surprised me, I really don't know what's underneath this, but it really surprised me that he didn't feel any ethical commitment to reimburse or provide any recognition to the artist. The only thing in my research that I could come up with is that in those days they didn't give credit to the artist. Like you see on the bottom, even if you don't have the best eye, see how it says Story and Art by Russ Heath. The only thing that I could in my research that I've seen is that in those days, there was nobody to give credit to. It just said DC and Marvel and Story by. So the art might be a bunch of artists on one page or one book, but you couldn't really separate that and give one artist, any recognition. So I hope all that to say that Roy Lichtenstein, in my opinion, was a catalyst for the feminist movement because he held up a mirror to a society that might not have liked what it saw. And when it doesn't like what it sees, perhaps it would be interested in changing. Does anybody have any questions?
Did any of the feminists of the day speak about his art and how they interpreted it?
During the day, in my research, it seemed as if he was considered like a sexist and possible misogynist because he was displaying things that women were trying to run away from. And maybe when you're that close to it, you're not able to see it. Like in retrospect, 50 years later, I'm able to say with complete clarity what he was doing, right? Or what I think he was doing. But when you're so close to it, like for instance, Gloria Steinem was in New York at the time, and there's so many things happening in the women's movement that maybe they weren't completely seeing the symbolism or the play on images or the play on words. But no, I haven't seen anyone directly mock him. I think the only backlash might be that young people that don't know much about art, that see his work, they might think that that is still considered beautiful. The same way that, I don't know if you guys see that what I see, but I see a lot of young people wearing Marilyn Monroe on their shirts still, which surprises me. And she's been dead for such a long time, but that's still considered very beautiful. She's still considered a very beautiful woman, even though she's been dead for so many years. So I think what I'm trying to say is that so many things have changed, but yet have they? I mean, really, I don't know how far we've come, because blonde is still considered very beautiful and youthful. I mean, there's still certain norms. A shapely young woman is going to have an easy time in life. I just say it the way it is. A white Caucasian woman with blonde hair, with youthfulness, is going to have a smooth ride, because pretty much no one's going to say no to her. Does anyone else have any questions? Or maybe a comment, you're curious about something?
I would say that today the Me Too movement shows that these young, beautiful women don't have so smooth a ride after all. That they're really taken advantage of and hurt in many ways. So.
I agree with you, but I don't think that this is a new thing. I think it's only new because we're hearing about it. Like for instance, Hollywood asking women for sexual favors. Yeah, I wasn't very shocked by that. Like I actually thought that's how you got into Hollywood because I guess I kind of wasn't naive and I realized that if that's the road you were going to take, then that's the choices that you make. I mean, that's kind of an odd statement, but I also feel like Me Too has brought a lot of that to light. But I don't know if that's new, I just think it's shocking because it's now people are getting arrested for, their actions and they're being penalized and getting fired. But I think it happened